Armin never believed that betrayal could grow inside a home that felt so normal from the outside. His life with Mayra had once been simple, almost predictable in a comforting way. They had built their marriage on shared routines, late-night talks, and small dreams about the future. Nothing grand, nothing dramatic, just two people trying to make life work in a quiet city where days often felt the same. And then there was Hamza, Armin's closest friend since university, the kind of friend who felt more like family than a guest in life. He had been there through everything that shaped Armin into who he was. That is why. When things started changing, Armin's mind refused to accept what his instincts were trying to tell him. It began in ways that were easy to ignore. Small delays in replies from Mayra. A softer tone when she spoke to Hamza compared to others. Slight pauses in conversations. When Armin entered a room, at first, Armin told himself it was nothing. People change moods. Life gets stressful. Trust is not something he wanted to question without reason. He had always believed that doubt destroys more relationships than truth ever does. So he pushed the thoughts away and focused on work, trying to maintain normality in his mind even. When small discomforts started collecting inside him like dust in a closed room, Hamza's presence in their life had always been natural. He was the kind of man who blended into any situation without effort. Calm voice, steady expressions, and a habit of listening more than speaking. People trusted him quickly because he never appeared to demand trust. He simply existed in a way that made others feel safe. That was what made Armin blind to what was slowly shifting under the surface. Hamza began visiting more often. At first, it was casual. A short visit after work, a shared meal, a conversation that stretched longer than expected. He would say he was just passing by, or that he had free time and thought to check in. Nothing unusual on its own, but patterns always reveal themselves. Slowly, like cracks forming under pressure that no one notices until it is too late. Mayra, on the other hand, started changing in ways Armin could not easily describe. She was still present, still doing everything she used to do, but something in her energy felt distant. It was not absence. It was something more confusing, partial presence. As if part of her mind was somewhere else even when she was physically there. Armin noticed how she sometimes smiled at her phone before quickly hiding the screen. He noticed how conversations between her and Hamza sometimes ended abruptly when he entered the room. And he noticed how she would become slightly defensive when he asked simple questions about her day. Still, Armin resisted conclusions. He told himself that imagination can be dangerous when fueled by insecurity. He had seen people ruin their own relationships by creating stories in their heads. He did not want to become one of them, so he chose observation instead of confrontation. He began paying attention without showing it. He studied patterns without speaking about them. He told himself he was just being careful, not suspicious, but care slowly turned into tension. One evening, Armin came home earlier than usual after finishing work ahead of schedule. The house was quiet in a way that immediately felt unusual. He stepped inside and heard voices from the living room. Mayra and Hamza were talking. Their tone was low, calm, almost intimate in a way that made Armin pause before entering. When he finally walked in, the conversation stopped instantly. That silence was not normal silence. It was a silence that carries awareness, like two people realizing they had been seen doing something they did not want observed. Mayra looked up and smiled quickly. Hamza also smiled, but his expression took a second longer to adjust. We were just talking about old college memories, Mayra said, her voice slightly brighter than usual. Armin nodded slowly, watching them both carefully. I see, Hamza leaned back slightly, trying to appear relaxed. Nothing important, just random stories. But Armin noticed something in the way Hamza avoided eye contact. It was subtle, but it stayed with him long after the conversation moved on. That night, when Armin lay in bed, he could not sleep. He replayed the moment again and again. Not because something obvious had happened, but because something had felt wrong without explanation. And when the mind cannot explain discomfort, it begins to build its own versions of truth. Days after that moment, Armin started noticing more gaps in behavior. Mara's phone was suddenly always locked when, before it had been casually open around him. She began taking calls in other rooms. Her responses to simple questions became slightly delayed, as if she was thinking about how much to reveal instead of just answering. Hamza's visits also became more frequent, sometimes overlapping with times Armin was not at home, but always in a way that could still be explained if questioned. Armin tried asking himself direct questions. Was he overthinking? Was work stress affecting his perception? Was he looking for problems because life felt too stable? But every time he tried to dismiss the feeling, something else would happen that pulled him back into uncertainty. Trust, once shaken, does not collapse immediately. It erodes slowly, and the person experiencing it often cannot tell if the problem is real or imagined until the damage is already deep. One evening, Armin returned home and noticed Hamza's shoes near the door. It was not unusual for him to visit, but the timing felt different. When Armin entered, he heard laughter from the kitchen. Mara and Hamza were standing close while preparing something simple to eat. The moment Armin appeared, the laughter stopped again. That pattern repeated itself enough times now that Armin could no longer ignore it. Didn't know you were coming today, Mara said, wiping her hands quickly. I finished early, Armin replied. His tone steady. Hamza nodded. Good timing. We were just about to finish. Armin observed them silently. The atmosphere shifted whenever he was present, not dramatically, but enough to create tension that did not exist before. It was as if the space between them had changed in his absence. Later that night, Armin sat alone in his room longer than usual. He did not speak to Mara much. He did not confront Hamza. Instead, he thought, not emotionally, but carefully, like assembling fragments of something that refused to become clear. He began remembering small moments he had ignored before, a message notification quickly hidden, a shared look that lasted a second too long, a sudden silence when he entered rooms unexpectedly. Still, there was no solid proof, only patterns, only feelings, and feelings Armin knew could be dangerous when left unchecked. But doubt does not need proof to grow. A few days later, Hamza called Armin in the evening. His voice was calm but carried a seriousness that felt slightly different from usual conversations. We should meet, Hamza said. Armin paused for a moment. About what? Just things. It's better if we talk in person. That simple sentence stayed with Armin long after the call ended. It was not what was said, but how it was said, controlled, careful. Like someone preparing for something important. They met at a quiet cafe later that week. Hamza looked slightly different than usual, not physically, but emotionally. He seemed more cautious, more measured in his speech. I don't know how to say this, Hamza began slowly. Armin watched him closely. Just say it. Hamza hesitated for a moment, then continued. Mara and I, we talk a lot when you're not around. She feels things are not the same between you two. Armin did not respond immediately. He simply listened. Hamza continued. I didn't plan anything. I just listened. That's all, listening. A simple word, but it carried weight that Armin could not ignore. Because listening becomes something more when it replaces boundaries that should exist. Armin stood up after a moment of silence. That's all you wanted to say, Hamza nodded. But his eyes showed something unspoken. Armin left the cafe without another word, and that was the moment something inside him changed, not into anger yet, but into clarity that slowly began replacing confusion. He stopped trying to understand everything emotionally. Instead, he started watching everything with distance, not as a husband, not as a friend, but as someone trying to understand what had already shifted without being told. And from that point forward, nothing felt the same again.